The Sands Hotel glittered like a diamond laid against black velvet on the night of July 18th, 1962. Dean Martin owned Las Vegas in a way that had nothing to do with property deeds or casino shares. He owned it the way a king owns a throne, not through conquest, but through presence, through the undeniable magnetism that made every room he entered feel like the center of the universe. The Copa Room was packed that night. 2,000 people in evening gowns and tailored suits, drinking champagne that cost more than most Americans made in a month, watching Dean command the stage with a kind of effortless grace that made performing look like breathing. He held a rocks glass in one hand, the microphone in the other, and his voice, smooth as aged whiskey, filled every corner of the room. This was Dean's kingdom. The Strip stretched out before him like a jeweled necklace draped across the desert, and he was the centerpiece, the largest diamond, the one that caught every eye. Frank Sinatra had the ambition. Sammy Davis Jr. had the raw talent. But Dean had something else, something harder to define. He had the cool, the ease, the ability to move between worlds without breaking a sweat. By day, he lunched with casino owners who smiled while counting money stained with blood. By night, he drank bourbon with Hollywood stars who pretended the mob didn't exist. And somehow, impossibly, Dean navigated both worlds without choosing sides, without making enemies, without losing himself in a compromise that swallowed lesser men whole. But Las Vegas in 1962 wasn't just glitter and showgirls. Behind the chandelier lights and the orchestras, behind the carefully maintained illusion of harmless entertainment, the city operated on a different set of rules. Men like Sam Giancana, the Chicago outfit's crown prince, had built Vegas into what it was. Their money financed the casinos. Their muscle kept things running smooth. Their connections reached from the desert to Washington, D.C., from union halls to the White House lawn. Dean understood the arrangement. You didn't work in Vegas without understanding who really owned the tables, who decided what shows got booked, who determined whether your career flourished or died in the desert heat. But understanding didn't mean participating. Dean kept his distance from the worst of it, maintaining relationships that were cordial but never too close, friendly but never familial. He sang. He drank, he made people laugh, and he stayed clean enough to sleep at night. That was the balance. That was the game. And Dean Martin was the best player Vegas had ever seen. The shadow falls. Something changed in mid-July. Dean felt it before he could name it. A shift in the atmosphere, like the pressure drop before a desert storm. Sam Giancana, who'd been a constant presence at the high-stakes tables and in the VIP rooms, suddenly vanished from the Strip. One week he was everywhere, loud and confident and throwing money around like confetti. The next week, gone. In Vegas, when powerful men disappeared, it meant one of two things. They were dead or they were running. The federal government had been tightening the screws on organized crime for months. Robert Kennedy, newly appointed Attorney General and brother to President, had made destroying the mob his personal crusade. Indictments were being prepared. Grand juries were convening. The kind of legal machinery that could grind even the most powerful criminals into dust was grinding faster every day. Giancana had always been too smart, too connected, too careful to get caught. But even smart men made mistakes when they got desperate. Even connected men found themselves alone when the heat got too intense. And Giancana was feeling the pressure from every direction. Federal investigators closing in, rivals in Chicago sensing weakness, and business interests in Vegas suddenly looking less profitable and more like liabilities. Dean heard the whispers. Casino managers talking in hushed tones. Dealers who'd worked for Giancana-backed establishments suddenly looking for new jobs. Money men from Chicago flying in and out of McCarran Airport with a kind of urgency that suggested crisis, not opportunity. Then came the phone call. It was late past 2 a.m. after Dean's final show. He was in his suite at the Sands, still in his tuxedo pants and undershirt, nursing a nightcap and going through the next week's song selections. The phone rang once, then silence, then it rang again. Dean knew that pattern. 2 rings meant someone wanted to talk off the record. He picked up on the 3rd ring. The voice on the other end was one he recognized, a mid-level casino manager who'd always been decent, always treated performers with respect. "Dean, you didn't hear this from me." "I'm listening." Giancana's got a property out past Henderson. Desert villa, real secluded. Word is he cleared out of there in a hurry 3 days ago. Left everything. Just vanished. Why are you telling me this? A pause. Then quieter. Because something ain't right. The guys who went to secure the property, they said it felt wrong. Like something bad happened there. And Dean, if something bad happened, if Giancana did something stupid before he ran, it's going to bring heat down on all of us. Every casino, every performer, everyone. The line went dead. Dean sat there in the dim light of his suite, ice melting in his glass. He could ignore this. Should ignore this. Whatever Giancana had done or hadn't done, it wasn't Dean's problem. He was an entertainer, not an investigator. His job was to sing, not to chase shadows in the desert. But that feeling, that pressure in the air, it wouldn't let go. Because Dean had learned something in his years on the Strip. Vegas only worked when everyone followed the code. Unwritten, unspoken, but absolute. You could cheat at cards if you were smart enough not to get caught. You could move money that belonged to other people. You could even kill if the killing was justified and clean and kept away from civilians. But you never, ever did anything that brought federal heat down on the entire city. You never endangered the machine that kept everyone fed. You never put your own problems ahead of the collective good. If Giancana had broken that code, someone needed to know. Someone needed to contain it before the damage spread. Dean set down his glass and made a decision that would change everything. The discovery. The desert villa sat 30 minutes past the Henderson city limits, accessible only by a dirt road that wound through scrub brush and sand. Dean drove his Cadillac slowly, headlights cutting through the darkness, dust rising behind him like smoke. It was 3:30 a.m., the kind of hour when the desert was completely silent, when you could hear your own heartbeat echoing in the emptiness. The house appeared suddenly, a low-slung modernist structure that looked expensive and out of place in the barren landscape. Security lights that should have been on were dark. The front door stood slightly ajar, swaying gently in the night breeze. Dean killed the engine and sat for a moment, letting his eyes adjust. Every instinct told him to turn around, drive back to the city, forget he'd ever come here. But that pressure, that wrongness in the air, it was stronger now, undeniable. He got out of the car, moving quietly despite there being no one around to hear. The front door pushed open easily. Inside, the house smelled of expensive cologne and stale cigar smoke and something else, something darker that Dean couldn't quite place. The living room was chaos barely contained. Glasses half full of melted ice scattered across tables. Ashtrays overflowing. Paper spread across the floor, like someone had been going through files in a panic. A safe stood open in the corner, empty. This wasn't a planned departure. This was flight. Dean moved through the house methodically. The kitchen looked untouched. The bedroom showed signs of hasty packing, drawers left open, hangers on the floor. In the master bedroom, an expensive watch sat on the nightstand, forgotten in the rush. Giancana had left in such a hurry he'd abandoned a Rolex. That's when Dean heard it. Faint, almost imperceptible. A sound that didn't belong in an abandoned house. A whimper. He froze, listening. There was again, coming from somewhere below. A child's cry, muffled and weak. Dean's blood ran cold. He'd walked into plenty of bad situations in his life. But this felt different. This felt evil. He found the basement door in the hallway, a heavy metal door with 3 deadbolts. All of them unlocked. All of them disengaged in a hurry. Dean pulled the door open and stared down into darkness. A set of concrete stairs descended into nothing. The whimper came again, louder now, echoing up from below. Dean flicked the light switch. A single bare bulb flickered to life at the bottom of the stairs, casting harsh shadows across unfinished walls. He descended slowly, his Italian leather shoes scraping against concrete, his heart pounding in a way it never did on stage. The basement was rough, utilitarian, the kind of space that wasn't meant to be seen. Concrete walls still showing the texture of the forms they'd been poured in. A water heater in one corner. Exposed pipes running along the ceiling. And in the far corner, almost invisible in the shadows, a small figure. Dean crossed the space in 4 strides and dropped to his knees. A little girl, no more than 10 years old, sat chained to a water pipe. The chain was thick, industrial, the kind you'd use to secure equipment, not a child. Her wrists were raw where the metal had rubbed against skin. Her dress, once white, was filthy and torn. Her blonde hair hung in tangled mats around a face marked with bruises. But her eyes were still alive. Terrified but alive. For a long moment, Dean Martin, the coolest man in Las Vegas, the performer who never lost his composure, couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't process what he was seeing. Then training took over. Years of maintaining calm in chaos, of projecting confidence even when everything was falling apart, of being the steady presence that everyone else could lean on. He shrugged off his tailored jacket, the one that cost more than most men's monthly salary, and wrapped it around the girl's shoulders. His voice, when he finally spoke, was gentle, the same voice he used for ballads, soft and steady and absolutely certain. "You're safe now. I promise. You're safe." Her eyes locked onto his, searching for truth in a world that had shown her only lies and cruelty. Dean held her gaze, let her see that he meant it, that whatever had happened here was over. "My name is Dean. I'm going to get you out of here. This chain, we're going to get it off you. And then I'm taking you somewhere warm and safe." "Okay." She nodded, just barely. The chain was secured with a heavy padlock. Dean searched the basement, found a toolbox near the water heater, and came back with a hammer and chisel. The work was crude and loud, metal ringing against metal in confined space, but eventually the lock shattered. Dean wrapped the jacket tighter around her and lifted her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, a fragile bundle of terror and trauma that shook against his chest. He carried her up the stairs, through the abandoned house, out into the clean desert air, where stars filled the sky in impossible numbers. He set her gently in the passenger seat of his Cadillac, turned the heat on high despite the warm night, and drove back toward Vegas without saying another word. Behind them, the villa sat dark and empty, keeping its secrets. But Dean knew, and knowing meant he couldn't walk away. The truth emerges. The Sands Hotel had never seen a scene like this. Dean Martin, still in his stage clothes from 6 hours ago, carrying a traumatized child through the service entrance while his manager, Herman Hover, cleared a path ahead. They moved quickly, bypassing the lobby entirely, taking the service elevator straight to Dean's penthouse suite. Within an hour, the suite had transformed into a makeshift sanctuary. Dean had called people he trusted absolutely, members of his inner circle who understood discretion wasn't just preferred, it was survival. A doctor arrived first, a man who treated performers for decades and knew when to ask questions and when to stay silent. He examined the girl carefully, documenting injuries, treating wounds, never pressing for information she wasn't ready to give. A woman Dean knew from the wardrobe department came next, bringing clean clothes, a hairbrush, items that might make a frightened child feel human again. She drew a bath, helped wash away the grime and fear, speaking softly about nothing important, just filling the silence with gentle sound. Dean sat in the living room, drinking coffee that had gone cold, watching the Vegas dawn break through his windows. Somewhere out there, GIANCANA was running. Somewhere out there, people were looking for this child. Somewhere out there, the truth was waiting to detonate. It was nearly noon when the girl finally spoke. She was clean now, dressed in borrowed clothes that hung loose on her small frame, sitting on the couch with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. The doctor had given her something mild for the pain, something to help her sleep, but she'd refused. She wanted to stay awake, needed to stay awake. Dean sat across from her, not too close, giving her space. The woman from wardrobe, whose name was Claire, sat beside the girl, a gentle presence. "What's your name?" Dean asked softly. "Emily." Her voice was small but clear. "Emily Hendricks." The name meant nothing to Dean, but Claire's sharp intake of breath suggested it should. "Hendricks," Claire repeated. "Judge Hendricks." Emily nodded. Dean felt the floor drop out from under him. Judge Robert Hendricks, federal judge, the man leading the organized crime task force that had Sam GIANCANA and half the Chicago outfit in its crosshairs. The judge whose rulings had sent 3 mob lieutenants to prison in the past year alone. The judge who became the government's weapon against everything Giancana had built. How long were you in that basement? Dean asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted the answer. 5 days. Emily's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't let them fall. They took me after school. There were 3 men. They put something over my face, and everything went dark. When I woke up, I was in that basement. Did they hurt you? The question came out harder than Dean intended. They yelled at me, told me if I made noise they'd hurt my parents. One of them hit me when I tried to scream. She touched her face where a bruise was fading to yellow, but mostly they just left me there, alone, in the dark. Claire's hand found Emily's, squeezing gently. Did you see the man who owned the house? Dean asked. Emily nodded. He came once, the first night. He looked at me like I was a problem he had to solve. Then he made a phone call. I heard him say my dad's name. He said, Judge Hendricks needs to understand what's at stake. He needs to understand we can reach anyone, anywhere. Then he left and didn't come back. Leverage. That's all this child had been to Giancana. A bargaining chip. A way to make a federal judge think twice about signing indictments. A message that said, we can take everything you love, so back off. Dean had seen a lot of ugly things in Vegas. Seen men beaten over gambling debts. Seen careers destroyed over personal vendettas. Seen violence that lived in the shadows and never touched the light. But this crossed every line. This wasn't business. This wasn't even crime. This was terrorism. This was using a child as a weapon. And then Giancana had run. Federal pressure mounting faster than expected. And he left Emily chained in that basement like she was nothing. Like she was disposable. Like her life mattered less than his escape. Why didn't anyone find me? Emily asked, and the question broke Dean's heart. Why didn't the police come? Because Giancana owned enough cops to know which ones wouldn't look. Because he'd chosen that villa specifically for its isolation. Because a man with infinite resources and zero conscience could make a child disappear and nobody would know where to search. Because the world isn't always fair, Dean said quietly. Because sometimes bad people do terrible things and good people don't know where to look. But Emily, I found you, and now I'm going to make sure you get back to your family. My parents must think I'm dead, she whispered. Your parents haven't given up hope, Claire said firmly. I promise you that. Parents never give up hope. Dean stood, walked to the window, looked out at the strip stretching into the distance. Out there, people were gambling, drinking, laughing, living in the Vegas fantasy. None of them knew that in this penthouse suite, a little girl was learning what it meant when fantasy collided with reality. And Dean was learning something too. He was learning that there was a line between the Vegas he performed in and the Vegas that existed beneath the surface. He'd always known the line was there, had always navigated it carefully. But standing here, looking at a traumatized child, he realized the line wasn't just blurry. It was broken. The code, Las Vegas, operated on rules. Not the rules you'd find in law books or city ordinances, but the real rules, the ones that kept the machine running smooth and the money flowing clean. Dean had learned those rules the hard way, through years of watching other performers crash and burn, through careful observation of who thrived and who disappeared. Rule 1, never ask questions you don't want answered. Rule 2, keep the civilians out of it. Rule 3, what happens in the shadows stays in the shadows. Rule 4, never, ever involve women and children. That last rule wasn't written down anywhere. It didn't need to be. It was a foundation that separated Vegas from chaos, the line that kept dangerous men from becoming monsters. You could run numbers. You could move drugs. You could enforce debts with violence. But you left families alone. You left innocence alone. Sam Giancana had shattered that rule into 1,000 pieces. Dean sat in his bedroom while Emily slept in the suite's second room, Claire watching over her like a guardian angel. He held a glass of bourbon but hadn't taken a sip. His mind was working through scenarios, calculating angles, trying to figure out how to navigate what came next. The easy path was obvious. Call the FBI. Anonymously tip them off that Emily was safe. Let the federal machine take over. Dean could walk away clean, back to his shows and his bourbon and his carefully maintained neutrality. But the easy path had problems. First, the FBI would want to know where Emily had been, who'd found her, how she'd escaped. The questions would lead back to Dean, and with them would come scrutiny. Federal agents asking why Dean Martin happened to be at Sam Giancana's desert villa at 3 a.m., asking what connections Dean had to organized crime, asking questions that could destroy his career even if the answers were innocent. Second, and more importantly, returning Emily through official channels meant Giancana would know exactly who'd interfered, would know exactly who'd cost him his leverage. And while Giancana was currently running from federal prosecution, desperate men with long memories eventually stopped running. Eventually, they looked for revenge. But Dean couldn't think about self-preservation. Not now. Not with a 10-year-old girl sleeping 20 feet away who'd spent 5 days chained in a basement because her father had the courage to stand up to criminals. The code that Giancana had broken wasn't just about Vegas. It was about civilization itself. It was about the unspoken agreement that said no matter how bad things got, no matter how dark the game became, some things remained sacred. Children remained sacred. And when someone violated that agreement, when someone showed they had no limits, no boundaries, no humanity, they had to be stopped, not just arrested, not just prosecuted, stopped in a way that made it clear to everyone else watching. This is what happens when you break the code. Dean made his decision. He would return Emily to her family personally. He would face whatever consequences came from that choice. And before he did, he would find Sam Giancana and deliver a message that the mob boss would never forget, because Dean Martin had power too. Not the power of violence or money or political connections. He had the power of reputation. The power of being the man everyone in Vegas trusted. The performer who could make or break a casino's reputation with a single phone call. The power of being beloved. And he was about to use every ounce of that power to make sure Sam Giancana understood what he'd done. The confrontation. It took Dean less than 6 hours to find Giancana. The mob boss hadn't run far. He was holed up at a ranch property in rural Nevada, about 90 miles outside of Vegas, a place owned by someone else's front company, but available for moments exactly like this. Dean got the location from a dealer at the desert and who owed him a favor, who understood that some debts transcended money. Dean drove alone, trading his Cadillac for a nondescript Ford, leaving before dawn. The ranch sat at the end of a long gravel road, a sprawling single-story building surrounded by empty land in every direction. 2 cars were parked out front. Men would be inside. Armed men. Dangerous men. Dean parked 50 yards from the house and walked the rest of the way. He knocked on the front door like he was arriving for dinner. The door opened to reveal a heavy-set man with cold eyes and a shoulder holster visible under his jacket. He started to say something, probably some version of get lost, but then he recognized who was standing on the porch. Mr. Martin? Confusion replaced hostility. What are you doing here? I'm here to see Sam. Tell him Dean Martin wants to talk. The man disappeared inside. Voices murmured. Then Sam Giancana himself appeared in the doorway. Looking thinner than Dean remembered, his expensive suit rumpled, his eyes carrying the weight of a man who knew the walls were closing in. Dean. Giancana's smile didn't reach his eyes. This is unexpected. Come in, have a drink. We'll talk out here, Dean said flatly. Something in his tone made Giancana's smile fade. They stood on the porch. 2 men who'd moved in the same circle for years, but had never truly been friends. While inside the ranch house, dangerous men listened and waited. I found her, Sam. Giancana's face went carefully blank. Found who? Emily Hendricks. In your basement. Chained to a pipe like an animal. The silence stretched between them. Giancana's jaw tightened. Then he laughed. But there was no humor in it. You broke into my property? Your abandoned property. The one you fled in such a hurry you left a child to starve to death. That's a serious accusation, Dean. It's not an accusation. It's a fact. I carried her out of that basement myself. 5 days, Sam. She was there for 5 days. How long were you planning to leave her? Giancana's eyes went cold. You have no idea what you're talking about. No idea what pressure I'm under. The feds are trying to destroy me, destroy everything I built. Hendricks is signing indictments that could put me away for life. I needed leverage. You needed to kidnap a 10-year-old girl? Dean's voice was quiet, but each word hit like a hammer. You needed to terrorize a child? That was your strategy. It would have worked. Giancana snapped. Hendricks would have backed off. One phone call showing him I had his daughter. One message making it clear what was at stake. And he would have killed those indictments. It was perfect. It was cowardice. Giancana took a step forward, anger replacing calculation. You calling me a coward? I'm calling you exactly what you are. A coward who thought power meant you could do anything to anyone. You cross a line, Sam. Not a legal line. Not even a mob line. You cross a human line. She's a tool, Giancana said coldly. Just leverage in a bigger game. You think I'm the only one who's used family to make a point? You think the outfit got where it is by playing nice? I think you endangered every single operation in Vegas because you were too stupid to understand the consequences. You grab a federal judge's daughter. You think that heat just disappears? You think the FBI doesn't turn this city inside out looking for her? You think every casino, every show, every business doesn't get buried under federal scrutiny? Dean took a step closer, his voice dropping. You were so focused on your own survival you forgot the first rule. We all survive together, or we all burn together. And you lit the match, Sam. You set fire to the entire strip. Where is she now? Giancana asked, and there was something dangerous in his voice. Safe. Where? That's not your concern anymore. Dean, you're making a mistake. You're interfering in something you don't understand. I understand perfectly. You kidnapped a child. You used her as a weapon. And when the plan fell apart, you ran like a rat, leaving her to die. There's nothing complex about that. There's nothing to understand except that you broke the code. Giancana's face twisted. The code? What code? There is no code, Dean. There's only power and weakness. There's only winning and losing. And you're choosing to lose. No, Sam. I'm choosing to make sure that what you did has consequences. I'm choosing to make sure that every person connected to Vegas knows exactly what you did, that you crossed a line that should never be crossed. You threatening to talk? To tell people? Giancana laughed bitterly. Who's going to believe you? Who's going to care? Everyone who understands that children are off limits. Everyone who knows that some things you just don't do. Everyone who's watched you spiral into desperation and wondered when you finally go too far. Dean turned to leave, then looked back. I'm returning Emily to her family. Personally. Tonight. And I'm making sure they know exactly who took her and exactly where she was. The FBI will have your name within 24 hours. The Chicago outfit will know you brought federal heat down on Vegas. Everyone will know, Sam. Everyone. You're dead, Giancana said quietly. You realize that? You're a dead man walking. Dean stopped. When he spoke, his voice was steady. Maybe, but at least I can look at myself in the mirror. Can you? He walked back to his car without looking back. Behind him, Sam Giancana stood on the porch of a ranch house in the middle of nowhere, watching his empire crumble into dust. The gamble. The Las Vegas Police Department's main station sat on Stewart Avenue, a squat building that looked utilitarian and serious in a city built on fantasy. Dean pulled up at 11:47 p.m., Emily in the passenger seat, wrapped in a blanket, Claire in the back seat for support. This was the most dangerous moment. The moment where Dean's choice to do the right thing could destroy him completely. He could still turn around, could still find another way, could still protect himself. But Emily was looking at him with eyes that had seen the worst of humanity and needed desperately to see something better. And Dean couldn't be the person who let her down again. Ready? He asked gently. Emily nodded. They walked through the front doors together. Claire stayed close to Emily while Dean approached the desk sergeant, a tired-looking cop working the night shift. I need to speak to whoever's handling the Hendricks case, Dean said. The sergeant looked up, recognized Dean Martin, and his expression shifted through several stages of confusion. Mr. Martin? What's this about? Emily Hendricks. I found her. She needs to see her parents. Now! The station erupted into controlled chaos. Within minutes, 6 officers surrounded them. Questions came rapid fire. Where had he found her? When? How did he know where to look? Was he involved? Dean answered calmly, telling the truth. An anonymous tip about GIANCANA'S villa, the abandoned property, the sound from the basement. He left out nothing except the name of the person who called him. Protected that source absolutely. Then came the moment Dean had been dreading. A detective in a rumpled suit stepped forward, his eyes hard. Mr. Martin, I'm going to need you to come with me. We have questions about your connection to Sam GIANCANA'S properties. I understand. Dean, no. Claire started. It's okay, Dean said quietly. He looked at Emily. You tell them the truth, okay? You tell them everything that happened. And you tell them I had nothing to do with it except finding you. Emily's eyes filled with tears. You saved me. Yeah, kid, I did. Now you save yourself by telling the truth. They led Dean to an interrogation room. For the next 3 hours, he answered every question, repeated his story, explained his reasoning, admitted to entering GIANCANA'S property without permission, but stood firm that he'd done it because a child's life was at stake. The detective, a man named Morrison, wasn't gentle. You expect me to believe you just happened to get a tip and decided to play hero? You expect me to believe Dean Martin, Vegas's golden boy who performs in mob-owned casinos, suddenly develops a conscience. I don't expect you to believe anything. Dean said evenly, I'm telling you what happened. Emily Hendricks can confirm every word. Emily Hendricks is a traumatized 10-year-old. She confirmed anything her rescuer said. Then check the villa, the basement. You'll find exactly what I described. Hours passed. Dean sat in that interrogation room, drinking terrible coffee, watching clock, wondering if he just destroyed his career to do the right thing, wondering if doing the right thing had been the stupidest decision of his life. Then the door opened. Judge Robert Hendricks stood there, a tall man with gray hair and eyes red from crying. Behind him was a woman Dean assumed was Emily's mother. And next to them, looking very small and very brave, was Emily herself. Mr. Martin, Judge Hendricks said, his voice thick with emotion. My daughter told me everything. Everything you did. Everything you risked. Dean stood, suddenly uncomfortable with gratitude. You saved my child's life, the judge interrupted. And in doing so, you've given me evidence that will put Sam GIANCANA away for the rest of his life. We've already dispatched teams to the villa. Everything you described is there. The basement, the chain, everything. Emily broke away from her parents and ran to Dean, throwing her arms around him. He knelt and hugged her back. This small girl who'd survived something no child should ever face. Thank you, she whispered. You're safe now, Dean said. That's all that matters. Judge Hendricks stepped forward. Detective Morrison, Mr. Martin is free to go. No charges. And I want it on record that without his intervention, we might never have found my daughter. Morrison looked like he'd swallowed something bitter, but he nodded. Yes, sir. Dean stood, exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with missleep. Claire appeared with a fresh coffee and a tired smile. Together, they walked out of the police station into the Vegas dawn. The city was waking up. Casino workers heading home. Early morning gamblers stumbling onto the street. The Strip preparing for another day of manufactured magic. And Dean Martin, Vegas's king of cool, got into his car and drove back to Sands, knowing that nothing would ever be quite the same. The performance. 24 hours later, Dean Martin stood in the wings of the Copa Room, watching the orchestra tune-up, listening to the murmur of the crowd filling the seats. It was Saturday night, prime time, a sold-out show that had been booked for months. Word had spread, not the details. The newspapers would never get the full story, would never print what really happened in that desert villa. But whispers traveled fast in Vegas. People knew something had gone down. Knew Dean had been involved. Knew it had something to do with GIANCANA and a missing girl. The FBI had raided GIANCANA'S villa that morning. Found everything Emily described and more. Found evidence of other crimes, other victims, other violations. The Chicago outfit was in full damage control mode, and Sam Giancana was now the most wanted man in America. Dean's manager had advised him to cancel the show, lay low, let the heat die down. But Dean had refused. He'd made a deal with himself. One night to do what was right, then back to normal, back to the performance, back to being the Dean Martin that Vegas needed him to be. The stage manager gave the signal. Dean took a breath, straightened his bow tie, and walked into the spotlight. The applause was immediate and thunderous. 2,000 people on their feet, not just for the performer they loved, but for something else, something they sensed but couldn't quite name. Dean stood there, soaking it in, and smiled. The smile that had launched 1,000 shows, that had made million-dollar deals, that had navigated impossible situations. But tonight, the smile felt different, heavier, more real. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said into the microphone, his voice smooth as silk, "thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for making Vegas what it is, the greatest city in the world for entertainment." More applause. Tonight, we're going to do what we do best. We're going to sing some songs, tell some jokes, maybe have a drink or two. He lifted his glass. Okay, maybe more than two. Laughter rippled through the crowd. But before we start, I want to say something. Dean's expression grew serious. This city, our city, it's built on a lot of things. Money, ambition, dreams. But underneath all of that, underneath the lights and the shows and the gambling, there's something more important. There's people. Real people with real lives and real families. The room had gone quiet. And the only way this city works, the only way any of this works, is if we remember that. If we remember that at the end of the day, we're all just people trying to get by, trying to take care of the ones we love, trying to do right by each other. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. Sometimes that means taking risks. Sometimes that means standing up when it would be easier to sit down. Sometimes that means doing the right thing even when the right thing is dangerous. Dean could see people in the audience nodding, understanding something they couldn't fully articulate. So tonight, I'm dedicating this show to everyone who's ever done the right thing when it cost them something. Everyone who's ever stood up when others sat down. Everyone who's ever chosen courage over comfort. He raised his glass higher. And I'm dedicating to a very brave young lady who survived something terrible and came out the other side. To Emily. The audience didn't know who Emily was, but they raised their glasses anyway, understanding that this was about something bigger than names. Dean drank, set down his glass, and nodded to the orchestra. The music swelled. He started to sing. And for the next 2 hours, Dean Martin gave the performance of his life. Not because the songs were different or the jokes were better, but because every note, every word, every moment carried the weight of what he now knew. He knew that Vegas was built on contradictions, that the same city that could produce beauty and art and joy could also hide darkness and cruelty and evil, that the men who financed the casinos and owned the clubs were the same men who broke the rules that held civilization together. He knew that performing in Vegas meant dancing on a knife's edge between legitimacy and corruption, between entertainment and exploitation, between a fantasy sold to tourists and the reality lurking in desert villas. But he also knew something else. He knew that even in a city built on moral compromise, there were still lines that couldn't be crossed. There were still choices that mattered. There were still moments when doing the right thing was the only thing that separated you from monsters. Sam Giancana had crossed that line, had made the choice to treat a child as a weapon, had become the monster, and Dean Martin had stopped him, not with violence, not with power, but with the simple act of caring, when caring was dangerous, of seeing a child who needed help and refusing to look away. The show ended to a standing ovation that lasted 10 minutes. Dean bowed, waved, and walked off stage. Backstage, his manager waited with a worried expression. "The word is out, Dean. Everyone knows you crossed Giancana. Everyone knows you're the reason the feds found Emily. You've made an enemy of the Chicago outfit." Dean loosened his bow tie, suddenly exhausted. "I know. They're going to come for you eventually. When this dies down, when Giancana's behind bars or underground, they'll remember. They'll want payback. I know, Dean repeated. Was it worth it? Was saving one girl worth making yourself a target? Dean thought about Emily's eyes when she'd hugged him at the police station. Thought about the way she'd whispered, "Thank you," like he'd given her back her life. Thought about Judge Hendricks and his wife holding their daughter, crying with relief and gratitude. He thought about the code, the unwritten rule that said some things were sacred, that children were off limits, that humanity mattered more than power. Yeah, Dean said finally, it was worth it. His manager shook his head, but didn't argue. They both knew there was no point. Dean had made his choice. He'd crossed his own line, the one that kept him safe and neutral and untouchable in Vegas. He'd chosen a side. He'd chosen humanity. And whatever consequences came from that choice, he'd faced them knowing he'd done the one thing that mattered most. He'd done the right thing. Epilogue, the legacy. Sam Giancana was arrested 3 months later in Mexico. The evidence from the villa, combined with Emily Hendricks' testimony, was enough to secure indictments on kidnapping, child endangerment, and a dozen other charges. He spent the next decade fighting legal battles, his empire crumbling, his power evaporating. He was never the same after that night. Dean Martin continued performing in Vegas for another 20 years. He never spoke publicly about what happened in Giancana's basement, never gave interviews about his role in Emily's rescue, never sought credit or recognition. But everyone who mattered knew that when it counted, Dean Martin had risked everything to save a child. And that knowledge changed how people saw him. He wasn't just an entertainer anymore. He was something more, something better. Emily Hendricks grew up, went to college, became a lawyer like her father. She never forgot the night Dean Martin carried her out of that basement, wrapped in his expensive jacket, whispering that she was safe. Years later, when Dean died in 1995, she attended his funeral and told the story for the first time publicly. She told a room full of Hollywood stars and Vegas legends about the night a famous singer became a hero, about the night Dean Martin proved that even in a city built on moral compromise, goodness could still win. The audience listened in silence. Then they stood and applauded, not for the performer, for the man, because in the end, that's what the story of Dean Martin and Emily Hendricks was really about. Not Vegas, not the mob, not even the kidnapping. It was about the moment when one person chose to see another person's suffering and refuse to look away. It was about the code, the unwritten rule that separates civilization from chaos. It was about remembering that some things, dignity, innocence, human life, are worth protecting even when protection comes at a terrible cost. August 1962. The month Dean Martin found a little girl in Sam Giancana's basement. The month he learned that the real performance wasn't on stage. It was in the choices you made when no one was watching. It was in the lines you refused to cross. It was in the code you kept, even when keeping it meant losing everything. That was Dean's final performance. Not the songs he sang or the jokes he told, but the moment he stood in the basement, looked at a frightened child, and said the words that changed both their lives. "You're safe now." Everything else was just entertainment. This was real.